All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second episode of the ShowBizNess podcast. And today I have a very special guest, all the way from the UK, one of the world's leading Elvis tribute artists, Mr. JD King. JD, nice to have you here.
Thank you. And I'll send you the €50 later for that plug. Thank you.
Well, that's good to hear. Obviously, there's been a lot of things going on. I mean, like in the whole Elvis world in the last few years, including the incredible Baz Luhrmann movie and all the stuff. I mean, like, did you see the current or the recent Christmas at Graceland show that was aired on TV? I think it was like broadcast internationally.
I didn't catch that actually because I was working that day, so I didn't see it, but I knew about it. And
Okay.
it's great, isn't it, that stuff like that is getting a lot of distribution and a lot of notice. It's a good sign for the health of interest in Elvis Presley after all these years after
Yeah.
he died. We're still celebrating him in such a proactive way. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's great to see.
Yeah, and especially when we notice that young people take interest in Elvis and his music and his performances, and I mean, like, there have been lots of new young Elvis tribute artists coming up in the industry, and like the whole scene seems to be kind of um, it's seemed to have had some kind of a rebirth of like interest in that something has sparked the candle to burn again. Let's say it like this.
Yeah,
I don't know.
unfortunately, there's far too many very good Elvis tributes coming up, which is terrible for me because they're taking all
Yeah.
my work. But no, and in all seriousness, it's when I started out 20 years ago, I was a second generation Elvis fan. Obviously, I wasn't alive when Elvis was alive, and I thought to myself, I've probably thought sometimes I wonder what it would be like when I'm older. Will there still be lots of young people coming through doing what I'm doing, what I've chosen to do? And there are, which is remarkable, really. And I feel like there's more and more, and there's a higher standard than ever of young people who are big Elvis fans who are just deciding, yeah, I want to be an Elvis tribute, and they just go for it. And you see them coming up from a young age as teenagers, really, even younger, going to Elvis festivals and competitions and
Yeah.
honing their craft so that, it's like they're in training. So by the time they're actually adults, they've been doing it for years and years, honing their craft. It's really quite amazing. And it's yeah, as a massive Elvis fan, it's just it's great to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, when we look at the time frame from let's say the 90s, when Elvis was let's say he's always been huge in terms of international popularity. But I think at some point in the 90s, his status was kind of it had went down just a little bit from where it was in the especially the 80s when there were lots of like mainstream Elvis album releases and all kinds of box sets put out, like the gold box set and the silver, these collectors like rare recordings and everything were issued. Um, but it seemed like the 90s were a kind of a let's say it was the whole thing seemed to be aimed a bit more towards the diehards, with the special series that were started. I mean, like, for example, the bootleg labels got really big at that point, like Fort Baxter, and then
Mhm.
there was Bilco. I think it was from Holland or somewhere. Fort Baxter, I can't remember where it was from, but uh, and then this thing started spreading like a wildfire, that there were all kinds of bootlegs and all kinds of rare releases popping up everywhere. And then RCA or BMG needed to do something, and then they put up in, was it 99, they formed Follow That Dream Records, FTD.
Yeah,
And
there was definitely a bit of a dip, like you were saying, in the 90s, not in popularity of Elvis in general, I think, but just maybe the cultural relevance, sorry, for people who weren't diehard Elvis fans. And that's only understandable. Elvis had been gone quite a while at that point, but then there was a kind of a renaissance in the late 90s. I mean, you talk about the bootlegs, and that's one factor for the diehards, but also there were a bunch of new BMG releases, like An Afternoon in the Garden, the afternoon show, Madison Square Garden, 1972, was released in 97, I believe. You got things like the platinum sets that came out, and new box sets. So that's the way it is, and lots of new CD releases, which helped to rejuvenate things. And people might think today, well, CDs, what does that matter? But back then, CDs were a big thing. Collecting CDs. This was before streaming, and then of course it all culminated, I think, with A Little Less Conversation being the song of the 2002 World Cup. That really cemented Elvis back at that was a global number one, and that really sort of made Elvis seem really cool again, because once you get a certain distance from a certain time period, it becomes retro. And around 2000, when you're about 30 years past a certain time point, that's when it becomes retro cool again. So the 70s were becoming cool. You had TV shows like That 70s Show, flares were coming back into fashion, all that sort of thing. So I think that helped sort of make Elvis, who was such an icon, not just of the 70s, but particularly of the 70s, seem cool again to younger people. So when you have all those factors come together, there was definitely a sort of a renaissance of interest in Elvis that built up through that time.
Yeah, that must have been quite an important factor when we think about how Elvis's popularity seemed to rise again in the early 2000s, especially the JXL remix of Little Less Conversation that you mentioned. I mean, it was huge. It was played all over, like in all kinds of commercial campaigns, and then there were even like remixes of a remix made to be played in like discos and all that stuff. And it was like that was the period when we think about A Little Less Conversation, it wasn't even a hit originally, and all of a sudden it became a huge monster classic, which everyone still remembers.
Yeah, it was a song Elvis actually liked. It actually is. I think it's mentioned in Peter Gornick's excellent biographies of Elvis that Elvis actually, because we all know that so many of the movie songs in the 60s had not been great, particularly by the middle of the 60s. But in It's Live a Little, Love a Little, I think, isn't it? Which appears in Little Less Conversation. He particularly liked the song, but it was not a hit at the time. But of course, it was one of those sort of hidden gems, wasn't it? That they sort of unearthed and remixed, and then it became a bit of a thing. The next year they tried to do it with Rubbernecking, which wasn't quite as successful, but it was still quite big. Paul Oakenfold did a big remix of that, and then they actually re-released a bunch of Elvis's original number ones. I remember there was around 2004, I think it was. They sort of started re-releasing his big hits, and they were going. It was quite a funny situation. They were going to number one in the UK, because by that point the singles chart wasn't that big. To get a number one single by the mid-noughties you didn't have to sell that many copies in a week. I think it was about 20,000 copies or something would probably get you a number one spot. So Elvis kept going to number one every week, every time they released one of these new re-released one of his classic songs, because Elvis fans were buying them and enjoying them, and the Radio 1 here in the UK refused to play. When they were doing their chart shows, they refused to play the Elvis song. They refused to acknowledge it was at number one, because they were so irritated that this old song was kind of, making all the modern music look a bit crap, because Elvis was at number one anyway. And I actually went into some music stores, and they had the top 10 CD singles, and they didn't have Elvis in the number one spot. They had what was at number two in the number one spot. And, and they had Elvis like hidden around a corner. And I actually complained at one point and said, Elvis is number one this week. Why is he not in the number one slot? And they were like, they were just annoyed about it. So anyway, that's a little aside. But the point is, it was that was part of the whole cultural sort of re-emergence of Elvis as being, not everyone obviously was into it, but it certainly became a much bigger deal again, I think, around that period.
Yeah, and obviously I was just a little kid at that point. I mean, like in 2002, when I think A Little Less Conversation remix was released, I was 3.
Wow.
And then I became an Elvis fan in 2007, when I was about to turn 8. And I remember the re-releases that you mentioned were still very much in sale at that point. I mean, like 2007 was a big year, 30 years since Elvis's passing. And I remember the 30 number one hits collection was particularly huge. I mean, like there were huge stands in all over like stores where CDs were sold, that this record was really selling huge amounts, even in Finland, I think. I mean, like I think it was number one at some point, and on the official Finnish charts, and then there was a DVD released as well. It was like, if I remember the title correctly, it was number one hit performances and more, which had like all these old TV recordings from like TV show appearances from the Dorsey shows and the Ed Sullivan shows, Frank Sinatra special, and then all kinds of individual movie songs from Blue Hawaii, Rockahula Baby, Can't Help Falling in Love, and from Girls, 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 obviously Return to Sender, from Fun in Acapulco, Bossa Nova Baby, and then stuff from 68 Comeback.
All the good stuff. All the good stuff.
Yeah. and stuff from like the 68 Comeback, obviously, and That's the Way It Is, and Aloha. And that was huge. I mean, like, that was really, 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 really a big thing. First of all, RCA had never released, or BMG, Sony, whatever, they had never released anything from the 50s TV shows officially after or apart from the Great Performances, which was only released on VHS. And
yeah,
all of a sudden there's a huge mainstream DVD compilation with all these, including like the screen test of Blue Suede Shoes that Elvis did at the Hal Wallis Studios. At the time he did the screen test for the Rainmaker. I mean, like, that's been completely, I think, unreleased in its entirety. I mean, like, there was all kinds of these special things. First time ever, the Madison Square Garden press conference was released officially. First time ever, the Germany press conference, or the press conference after he came back from the army in Germany. The first time ever that interview was released officially, apart from This Is Elvis, where it was just a little snippet. I mean, like, and then all these old TV shows and movie songs that they had to get licensed from Warner and Paramount and whatever. I mean, like, they must have put huge effort on that release. And I mean, like, that was
I mean, there was clearly an appetite for it. There was clearly an appetite for this content, because Elvis was, and it was the product of the time as well. When you think of DVDs, you think of releases. DVD as a technology was great, because suddenly, if you're buying a movie on DVD, you've got all the special features. You've got the behind the scenes documentaries and all that kind of thing, which is not something you could really do on VHS. So that the technology gave them an opportunity, I think, to really sort of sift through the archives and see what else they could find.
Yeah, and actually, when I think about it, this was the only time when I think Sony or RCA, BMG managed to please both the casual Elvis fans and the diehards, because it was very much a hit compilation, but it consisted of many performances that the diehards had been craving for decades, and it had all these like bonus, like the special features, like you mentioned, like the interview, the conferences, and that kind of stuff. It was clearly aimed also towards the diehards and not just the casuals. And I think it's still, I would say it's the best individual DVD release of Elvis's music that's ever been released. I got it as a birthday present for my 8th birthday in December 27, and I was like blown away. It was absolutely fantastic, and I still treasure that release to this day. I still watch it very often.
Well, that's the effect that Elvis can have on people. You know, I had a similar experience when I was a kid. Obviously, I'm a lot older than you are. I mean, my first experiences were probably in the late 80s, early 90s. But for me, it was records. So it was actually discovering a 40 greatest hits record, which was a very popular release they'd done. I don't remember I don't know when it came out, but a lot of people had it. It was a double album, 40 greatest hits, and my mother had it, and I found it. I just was looking through the sleeve covers of her records, and I just saw the cover, and I liked the look on the cover, and had a big picture of Elvis's face, like an arty picture of his face. And I think I just said, "Oh, who's that?" You know, and was just interested in it. She said, "Oh, that's the king of rock and roll. That's Elvis." You know, so I put it on, and it was, you know, put the first side on. It's Hound Dog, Blue Suede Shoes, Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock, King Creole, all that kind of stuff. And hearing rock and roll for the first time when you're a child, when you're that age, just like you're describing with the DVD set, when you're young and you hear that kind of thing for the first time or see it, it's it can have real profound effect on you. It can like go, wow, this is incredible. And Elvis has that effect. And I, at that point, I just heard him. I hadn't even seen a video of him before. I just heard his voice. But even so, I was just hooked. I was like, I listened to it over and over. I used to sing along to it and dance along to it, and just wanted from that point to learn more and more about him, you know. So you and I are very similar like that. I think we just discovered him at a young age as kids, and in a way that had a profound effect on our brains, you know. So before we know it, we're chasing the dragon, quote unquote. We're chasing the bootlegs and the rare footage and the outtakes, and before you know it, you're down the rabbit hole of Elvis everything.
yeah, definitely. And want to know what the first record was that I got from Elvis? I mean, like, this was in mid 2007, like several months before I got the DVD or got any more like let's say deeper into this finding all these releases. I mean, like, the first ever Elvis album that I got was an unofficial. It was a bootleg, and it was a budget CD that consisted of the Louisiana Hayride performances from 55, 56. And I was like, I was like, this CD sounds horrible. I mean, like, I literally, yes. I had never heard anything with such a bad sound quality. But obviously it was due to the fact that these women in the concert were screaming like chicken, and the equipment was very limited at the time. Recording
was very,
equipment.
very different back then. Yeah. Unfortunately, it'd be lovely to have higher quality recordings, but the speed at which sound technology progressed, you know, is remarkable. You listen to early 60s versus late 60s, you know, live recordings, and they're just night and day difference. So it's a shame it didn't exist at the time.
And even when you compare the Hayride recordings to the Pearl Harbor show from 61, there's still a bit of that annoying screaming covering the music at some points, but it already sounds far better.
It gives you an idea what it would have sounded like to be there. And I actually quite like recordings that have that atmosphere. I mean, there's a lot of obviously we're skipping ahead here, but Elvis recordings in the 70s, especially bootlegs, when they're soundboard recordings, they can be very flat and very dull because it's just like the mix and the soundboard and you can't hear the crowd at all, or maybe it's still a little bit. But I like it when you can hear the crowd. Obviously, you don't want to not be able to hear the music, right? But I like to get a sense of what the atmosphere would have been like, what it actually would have felt like to see him.
Obviously, yeah. And this was the first release or the first record that I ever got from Elvis. And then I got 3 low-budget compilations of like songs from, I think they were from 54 to 57, like the Sun stuff, and then very early RCA recordings. And that was the first time I ever heard songs like Love Me Tender even. I mean, like I had never heard before, like let's say September 2007. And then I heard Ready Teddy for the first time, Rip It Up, Long Tall Sally, When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold Again.
Great rock and roll classic, Elvis classics, really.
Yeah, All Shook Up. Stuff from the Sun era. I mean, like Baby Let's Play House.
So you very much started off with, like I did, with the 50s, with the early stuff. That was really
yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Yeah,
same here. That was the stuff that I was into as well personally. I mean, when I had this 40 greatest hits, so it had the 70s stuff as well on the second album, but it was really the 50s stuff that really spoke to me when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and then I got a compilation. It was an RCA BMG, quite big thing. They released a series of compilations of important artists from the retro era, which was called The Essential. I think those albums were released in 2006 and 2007. It was a huge mainstream series, and interestingly, this compilation, however, was produced by Ernst Jørgensen and Roger Semin, who had already started FTD and all that stuff, and all of a sudden there were songs on an official mainstream compilation like Moody Blue, or let's say My Way from April 77, and Unchained Melody and that kind of stuff. And I mean, stuff that wouldn't be heard on these old compilations. All of a sudden they were putting rare live recordings on mainstream compilations, and that was the first time I ever heard Suspicious Minds, In the Ghetto, Always on My Mind, Kentucky Rain, My Boy, My Way, Unchained Melody, all that stuff. And I was like, wow, so versatile. I mean,
that's the word, versatile, isn't it? Yeah. I mean,
versatile,
that's the thing. The wonderful thing you can discover about Elvis is that it's not one speed. A lot of artists are very famous for a certain sound, a certain style of music, and you take it or leave it. But with Elvis, you might discover him as a rock and roller like we did, a classic rock and roller, but then suddenly it's like, ooh, there's all these beautiful love songs and ballads, and oh, now he's singing soul, and now he's singing gospel, now he's singing country. So he managed. He had a voice that really drew you in such a way. He was so good at emoting, the emotions, that it felt very genuine whatever he was singing about. Even with stuff that you knew that he probably only did a few takes of in the 70s and didn't think too much about, he still had that capacity to draw you in with what he was doing. So you get that rich experience with Elvis that's not really replicated by any other artist.
Yeah, there's only one recording that's not of a movie song where I can tell that Elvis's motivation is completely out of the window. And that's Three Corn Patches from July 73. He sounds bored out of his skull. I mean,
Yeah, he sounds a bit, but on most of those recordings, well, yeah, he did a few of them in July '73. He's much better by December. He's in a much
Yeah,
better place
yeah,
by
definitely.
December. But but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those he actually recorded. I think they set up just for him to, they called in Palm Springs or something. I think they would set up a remote recording thing for him to do.
Yeah,
So he just did a voiceover to a pre-recorded track on some of those. So yeah, he wasn't fully motivated in that moment. Let's
no,
say that,
no,
or
and
so much into the
obviously,
songs he was doing. But that's a complicated story in itself about how he was presented with songs to record, and the lack of quality control was often the case. Um, yeah, it's a shame because you can think
yeah,
of all the things he could have recorded had it been managed better. But that was partly just the way they went about recording it. It was also partly because Elvis himself wasn't actually, as we know, by the mid '70s, wasn't really into recording in the studio anymore. He just didn't. He tried to avoid it at all costs,
yeah,
even though he was contracted by RCA to produce a certain number of albums every year. I can't remember exactly what the terms were of the contract. Was it 2 albums a year, something like that? But it was something that at times would have felt like an obligation rather
yeah,
than
and
something he was looking forward to, which is a shame.
yeah, and I think partly the Colonel must be also one to blame because obviously the Colonel had a really big control on what Elvis did, whatever he did um, throughout his career. I mean, like everything that Elvis did was more or less connected to the Colonel's deals, including recording stuff, including
Yeah.
movie contracts that were endless. They just went on and on and on and on and on. Um, and it's
Yeah,
really
the commercial side came before the creative side a lot of the time.
yeah,
Sometimes they
definitely.
came together really well, but for example, when Elvis was recording in 1969, an American with Chips Moman, who was a really good producer, and he brought really good songs to Elvis, and he pushed Elvis to produce his best. He wasn't just going to passively sit there and say that's great and move on. He was like, no, 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 he got the best out of Elvis. But of course, he clashed with Colonel Parker about song rights, particularly Suspicious Minds,
Yeah,
where he's Colonel wanted to take all of the rights to it, even though Chips had presented it as a song, and he said, "No, I've got to take some money from this," and they almost didn't release it. I think it was only Elvis himself who was saying, "No, I really want this song out," that got it out there, and thank goodness they did because Suspicious Minds is probably the most famous '70s era. I know it's '69 he recorded it, but that era of Elvis, that later era, that's probably his most famous song of all.
yeah. Either that or Burning Love.
Yeah, I think Suspicious Minds is, I mean, Burning Love is probably the biggest of the actual '70s, certainly post 1970 itself. But I mean, when I'm performing, if they only want me to do one song, it'll be Suspicious Minds. Yeah, that's always
Yeah,
the way.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And then obviously, when we think about Suspicious Minds as a live song, it's got all the
Yeah.
recognizable elements of Elvis as a live performer, all the moves
Yes.
and the mannerisms and the way he
You're
commanded.
right. It's like a combination of all those great features because of course it's him with his dynamic
Yeah, the
moving,
way.
but it's also a really heartfelt song, a love song, and it's
Yeah,
very exciting and bombastic, and yeah, an experience to see him do it. So yeah,
yeah,
it's the best of
and
everything, really.
the way he commands the audience, the way he commands the band. I mean, like
Yeah,
watching the August 70, like that's the way it is. Even the outtakes of Suspicious Minds, there are one or two versions that were not released on the actual movie, neither the original one or the 2001 re-edit.
or the one they
And
changed for the special edition. Yes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and
I still prefer the original version. That's just me. But it was different every night, wasn't it? That's the point. He would. I mean, eventually it got very formulaic, but it got shorter and shorter and faster and faster. But because he after a while he just got bored of the song. He didn't like it. He'd even say, "Oh, I hate this song" in the middle of it. But
yeah,
early on when he was performing it, it was a really dynamic experience, and it was different every time.
yeah, and especially the really big the really popular version, was it August 13th, I think, or August 13th, or August 12th, or August 13th, 1970.
Which one are you talking about? The one he's in the chain suit?
Uh,
The one in the chain suit? With that'd be August 12th midnight show. The one in the chain suit.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Special
probably.
edition is from the previous day, I think. I think it's August 11th, the other one. But anyway,
all right.
getting super nerdy on that.
Yeah, but this is, I would say, that's the most exciting Elvis live performances I've seen from the 70s, and that's definitely one that I would show to anyone who asks me to show one particular performance of Elvis Presley live. I would show that version of Suspicious
They're great
Minds.
Examples. Although the tragedy is, and as we know very well because we're into this sort of thing, links and fan videos and things, there are tons of brilliant performances of that Elvis gave that were never recorded officially. And that's one of the great tragedies of Elvis's life career, is that so little of it was actually recorded properly. Like, most of it was not recorded at all. Unless we're talking about a sound engineer plugging a tape into the soundboard occasionally, because Colonel Parker wasn't interested in recording stuff, and he wanted to control everything constantly. So he didn't see the point of it. It's such a shame, because most big groups by the mid-70s were recording most of what they did on tour. But with Elvis, it's just, video. There is no official video of Elvis on stage between Aloha from Hawaii in January 73 to Elvis in concert in June 77. That's a huge gap of no official video of Elvis at all. And that's just a tragedy, really.
Exactly. And the really sad realization is that we only have one fully recorded live show released from the 70s to a mainstream audience, because the Aloha box set that features both the rehearsal show and the official, the main show, was clearly directed at diehards. And when we think about the mainstream or the casual audience, the only full show they have the opportunity to see from the 70s is Aloha. I mean, like, they must have recorded full shows from April 72 for Elvis on Tour. They must have really recorded full shows from August 70 for That's the Way It Is. But those shows are down to copyright issues. They might forever be stored in Warner's vault or something. I mean, like, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's tragic, because I mean, Aloha from Hawaii is presented as kind of the greatest Elvis concert, and it was in terms of its production and in terms of its audience watching around the world. We know up to 1 billion people could see it. Sadly, I don't want to sound controversial saying this, but it's not Elvis concert, not by far. Elvis isn't bad in it. He looks great, but it's quite a subdued performance, if we're honest. Aloha from Hawaii. His voice is again, it's good, but it's not at its most lyrical or its most exciting or interesting to listen to. He plays it very safe in that concert. He doesn't do much outside the box. He barely does any dancing. So it's a little sad that that's the only sort of full concert, like you said, that is presented with Elvis. Even from 9 months earlier in the April 1972 tour, where they filmed 4 or 5 shows in their entirety for the documentary Elvis on Tour, MGM documentary. We could, in theory, see an entire concert from that time. We've heard the concerts on CD and we've seen clips from most of them. But it's a tragedy not to have, given how like we said, how little there is of Elvis available actually performing. It's a shame that deals haven't been able to be done with studios to actually fully release these things. We obviously got the special edition of the That's the Way It Is documentary from 1970, which was released in 2000, I believe, the special edition. But even that didn't include certain songs because they couldn't get the rights to them. Bridge Over Troubled Water being the big omission from the actual live performance you see at rehearsals of. So it's and that didn't do as well as they thought it would do, I think, in terms of cinema views. So they they decided not to do any more after that, which is a shame because they did not promote it at all. There was no posters anywhere for it, especially here. I didn't even know it was on until I saw maybe a newspaper clipping about it. But anyway, that all aside, it's just a tragedy that the few things we do have, the sort of dozen or so concerts of Elvis that we've never seen in their entirety are sitting there in a vault, rotting away on film. And we may never see them. But then again, Baz Luhrmann is planning to do something about that. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get some kind of, streaming service kind of release where we get to see a lot that we've never seen before.
Yeah, but imagine if the deals had been able to if there had been deals made, like, let's say, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when the DVD format was really big. Imagine something like Live at Hampton Roads 72, the full show, remastered in high definition, or that kind of stuff. Imagine the success that it would have been.
I think it still could be a success. I mean, you could take one of those concerts from Elvis on tour. Hampton Roads is a great choice. My personal favorite is the Richmond concert where he was wearing the Burning Love jumpsuit, the red jumpsuit.
Yeah.
But any of those concerts, quite frankly, and you could release it in its entirety. You could remaster it in 4K HDR. You could do all of that because it's film stock. You've got great audio recording because it was all properly recorded that way.
Yeah.
And you could release it as an entire concert, and you could put it on Amazon Prime or Netflix or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that would be what I'd love to see. Obviously, I would love to see all of those concerts released in their entirety. They probably won't do that, but at the very least, I'd like to see them do something like release one of them, or maybe a load more clips that we've never seen before, because, quite frankly, this stuff, particularly the Elvis on Tour stuff, has just been sitting there untouched since it was made in 1972. They've never done anything to it. The only thing they've done to it is that they ruined the opening of the movie when they put it on Blu-ray because they were worried about getting the rights to the song Johnny Be Good. So they changed the intro music to Don't Be Cruel, and it doesn't work at all. Because apparently they contacted Chuck Berry's people at the time. They didn't hear back, so they assumed he wouldn't allow it, so they took it out of the film. So that was kind of annoying. But apart from that, it's just like we said, it's the great area of unlocked potential with Elvis content still there that we haven't had released yet.
Yeah, and also from the same era of like making of the on tour documentary, there's also this great audio interview that was done of Elvis, where he talks very openly for like 45 minutes about the different phases of his career, the different periods, different projects that he's been working on, his movie career, everything. And I listened to it one day on YouTube, and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty interesting. Why haven't they even released that officially? I mean, like, it would be the easiest thing in the world.
That was filmed as well. Yeah, that was filmed and recorded with him. It's just like a candid interview, isn't it? Where they're talking about his career. You hear a few clips of him talking from that in the original Elvis on Tour film. But there's a lot of material there, and people like stuff like that.
They filmed it.
There's some clips of it. They did film it. I'm pretty sure they did. I'm sure there's some clips of him standing there in his kind of one of his sort of 72 shirts with the yoke, with like a yellow yoke, like a blue shirt, and he's talking. I'm pretty sure it's filmed, but I could be wrong on that one. But I'm pretty sure I've seen some clips. Yeah.
That would be great to see and hear. I mean, like in its entirety, because the bootleg version of the interview that I've heard, the 45 minutes, I don't even know if that's the full version of, or maybe even that one is incomplete. But it's very interesting to hear him speak so openly, so relaxed, and show that he's actually in the moment. He's pretty coherent in that interview and giving some pretty interesting answers. I mean,
Absolutely. Again, that was quite rare. Elvis didn't give interviews particularly, and it was nice that they actually did a proper interview with him for that film. So it really is a tragedy that so little of it was actually used in the film,
Yeah.
because Elvis did beyond that, there's virtually nothing. He did a press conference for Aloha in September 72, I believe it was. Is there anything after that? Did he do any press conferences after that? I'm not sure that he
Yeah.
did. So again, it's very rare. He did the stuff before Madison Square Garden, June 72, and he did a September 72 press conference where he said very little. He seemed very tired and didn't want to be there, didn't say much at all. And that's about it.
And
So beyond that,
in Honolulu in November 72, he did a short interview, which was kind of like a promotional thing for Aloha. And then there was some short radio interview from, was it the summer of 75, where he was interviewed at a football game.
Oh yes, yeah.
And
But
that's
that's
it.
kind of like an off the cuff kind of thing, yeah. So it's again very, very little at that point of an insight into Elvis. He did talk about how he did want to write a biography, an autobiography. I think he wanted to call it Through My Eyes. I think that's what he said to people. It was his working title for it. That would have been interesting, wouldn't it, to have read his perspective on his life. Obviously, he didn't think he was going to die when he did, so he hadn't done any work on it. But I think he had an idea that he wanted to tell his story and of course, the best other insight we have is all of this sort of slightly rambling and at times incoherent but good fun career stories he did in '69, which are fun to listen to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we didn't get anything proper beyond that. It would have been nice to have heard more from the man himself about how he felt about his life.
Yeah, and all of this kind of adds to Elvis as some kind of a mythical figure who's always had this aura of like some kind of a mystery around him. Yeah, there must be so much stuff that we don't even know about now, whether it be in terms of footage not being released. I mean, like whether it be in terms of like we probably don't even know all the like the details of his life. I mean, like in his personal life, there must be things that we don't know, and we probably will never know, because obviously even such a huge superstar as Elvis was, even he's obviously allowed privacy, and he was allowed privacy back then. He's still allowed privacy in death. But I have a feeling there are some interesting things that we don't know.
Yeah, things we may never know. I mean, obviously, we're talking about the private life of somebody that none of us were there to see these events, and of course, it's long since passed now. We're talking best part of 50 years. So yeah, but there are always people who have written books who met Elvis, who, even if they didn't know him that well, they can tell stories. It's always nice to get an insight into someone who if you, like us, we admire so much and we're interested in to that degree. It's always nice to learn new things. So you never know what might turn up. I hope that there are things out there that are unearthed. I mean, there are private collectors out there who have all sorts of recordings and things of Elvis that they don't share with the world, which I find very annoying, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Footage, concert footage, stuff that was filmed by news crews, things like that. Because again, there's so little good concert footage from the '70s, and I'm such a fan of that particular era that it frustrates me to know that there are people out there who've got this stuff and they just sit on it and they don't do anything with it. They just like the fact they own it. So it's up to them. They bought it legally, they own it legally. But it'd be nice if they shared it with the world. If it were me, if I had the money to buy an original recording of Elvis that would have been released, I would just release it. I'd just put it online and say, there you go. Everyone will see it, enjoy it. I wouldn't have any I wouldn't be selfish and just hold on to it for myself, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's that's definitely one thing that gripes me as well, is this thing that people own all kinds of special recordings and special footage and all that kind of stuff, but they don't share it because they think that they own it and they don't have any. Obviously, they're not in any kind of a they don't have any they don't have to
share.
obligation.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have to.
Yeah.
They don't have to share those things, but it's still frustrating.
Yeah, it's always going to be frustrating, but hopefully one day they'll pop up. Like you said, there could be a collector. Maybe he passes away, leaves his stuff to his children, and then those children say, "Oh, he's got some Elvis, bit of film here. Let's just stick it on YouTube, or let's just give it to the estate or something, and then they release it or whatever." So you never know; these things can happen.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah, that's a possible thing as well. There's one thing I would like to memorize from my childhood as an Elvis fan before we move on to the next topic, because we already strayed quite far from the original topic now, because we talked about all the unreleased material in the vaults and everything. But
got stuff off our chests,
Yeah, and there must be viewers like watching this when the video gets posted online. There must be people thinking, what the hell are they talking about? I mean, like,
I apologize for that. It's a deeply nerdy conversation.
yeah. I apologize too, even though I'm not even sorry. But actually, the 30 number one hits CD and the number one hit performances and more DVD collections, where we already talked about those, but I had a very special DVD, or I still have it. That was actually I must have gotten it before I even got the number one hit performances and more DVD. I got a low budget bootleg, or let's say semi-official DVD that was, I think it was produced by some German company that released a lot of these old TV and movie compilations of like individual clips from old TV shows and movies that weren't like that were kind of protected from the copyright issues, and were like spread all over all kinds of unofficial releases, but not really illegal in that way, at least not directly. It was a DVD called Elvis Presley Forever, and it had stuff from the '68 comeback, That's the Way It Is, and Aloha. I think it had 30 songs, and I was like, wow. I was like, it was kind of like a best of all those three films or programs, and I was like, Jesus Christ. I mean, like, so many great songs in there. That was the first time I ever heard, for example, Just Pretend. You Gave Me a Mountain, My Way. The first time I saw the Aloha version of My Way, the first time I ever heard it was on the Essential CD compilation, but the first time I ever saw Elvis do My Way and all that kind of stuff, the first time I ever saw him like do the kissing the girls routine on Love Me Tender from That's the Way It Is, and I was like, oh damn, that was a great release. I mean, like, I still treasure it to this day.
Some real highlights there. Yeah.
Do you remember when was the first time you saw that must have been a VHS back then, but what was the first VHS of Elvis that you owned?
That's a really good question. I have to say something slightly controversial in that I can't remember exactly what the first video I got of Elvis was. I think we saw things like, I think we had tapes of things like This Is Elvis, which was like 1980 or whatever it was, you know. There was Elvis the Great Performances, which came out similar time period, maybe, or maybe a bit later. So I saw bits of things like that to introduce me to like with you, sort of clips of things. But I do have a memory of actually, I don't know if it was bought for me or we hired it from a video store, but watching Aloha in the early 90s. So when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I guess, watching Aloha, and I was really excited to see it, but I didn't enjoy it that much. And that sounds terrible, but I was really into 50s Elvis at that time. It was all about 50s Elvis. So I looked at the tape and I looked at the list and it's like, oh, there's Hound Dog in there, there's Blue Suede Shoes in there. They were probably the two I was most looking forward to watching in the concert. And of course, anyone who's seen this concert of Elvis from 1973, those songs are probably some of the songs that he puts the least effort into. They're about, I mean, Blue Suede Shoes is about a minute long, and so is Hound Dog. They're really short. There are only one verse, maybe two. I mean, Hound Dog, there's only two verses, and he ever sings one, pretty much. He hardly ever sang the second verse. So it was disappointing. It was like, oh, that's not like the record, you know. So I have that memory, which obviously I learned to appreciate, a bit like, you know, appreciating a fine wine. You know, you can't appreciate wine when you're a child, but as you get older, you know, you can really appreciate it. You know, it's a bit like that. So I came to appreciate it a lot more at a later age, but it was I do have that memory of Aloha and being disappointed, but because it wasn't the sort of the 50s style that I'd seen clips of and I'd listened to records of. But yeah, the other videos would have been those, you know, the great performances, This Is Elvis, That's the Way It Is, the Lost Performances, which is a really good video of you know, what it sounds like. Mostly stuff from That's the Way It Is, but a few bits from Elvis on tour as well.
I was looking forward to you mentioning that the Lost Performances.
Yes,
that
yeah, I've got it over there. Yeah, the Lost Performances is a key one. And yeah, so just bits and pieces, like with you, sort of compilations mainly of bits of Elvis. You know, obviously there was no YouTube back then. I couldn't just look stuff up online. I just had to find, you know, are there videos, are there documentaries, you know. And of course Elvis films, you know. So one of the earliest Elvis films I watched was probably Blue Hawaii. That's still one of my favorite Elvis films. In terms of favorite Elvis films, I'd say is Jailhouse Rock, King Creole, are my two favorites, but then because they're probably the two best ones in my opinion. But I also do like GI Blues, Blue Hawaii, Viva Las Vegas. I like The Trouble with Girls. I like Tickle Me, which is probably the lowest budget Elvis movie of all time. But because they had so little money to make it, they basically could only pay, I think it was Allied Artists was the studio, and they were going bankrupt, and they basically had enough money to pay Elvis's fee and nothing else. So it was all filmed on backlots. They didn't have any money to write songs for the film, so they used a bunch of songs from 1960 and 61. So the soundtrack's really good because there's really good songs in it because the stuff Elvis has actually done in the studio. And there's a lovely, my favorite scene is when he's in a saloon and he asks for the usual, which is like 3 fingers of milk, and he drinks it and then he chokes on it like it's hard liquor, you know. It's a lovely bit of fun comedy in it. So yeah, so stuff like that, you know, those kinds of things I discovered as I was growing up.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Those are some really cool releases you just mentioned, and of course the movies. Obviously, it's very interesting to hear that you from what I understood, you saw all these movies as a child already as well.
Yeah, it's mainly those ones because we got the videos for them. I think we hired them from Video Shop, and but it wasn't until much later that I really sort of saw most of Elvis. I've seen all of Elvis's films at least once, but I'm not the biggest Elvis movies guy. I mean, I'm really big on the 70s. And you know, I as a kid I loved the 50s. As an adult, I loved the 70s. And I do like Elvis's movies, and I have seen them, but I don't watch them all the time. I have half a dozen that I really like and I enjoy, and I do come back to occasionally, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert on the movies. You know, if you said, oh, what's your favorite songs from Frankie and Johnny, you know, It's like I don't know. I can't remember what songs are in Frankie and Johnny. Clam Bake. I know You Don't Know Me, I think, is in Clam Bake. That's a good song. But yeah, so it's that kind of thing. So, but it was just discovering bits and pieces. Back in those days, you just didn't have the option just to look for everything or collect everything. You just had to find what was available and just discover it organically like that.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously understandable because the technology was so different back then. It was the world was much bigger then. So yeah, but wait a minute. There's something wrong with my lip. So I was just thinking that those funky angels in the ceiling.
He's going off on one now. He's digging out all the quotes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention the 68 special, of course, I discovered on video as well at the time. Yeah, obviously, that was another one, which you were alluding to with the lip.
Yeah.
Something on my lip. I can usually I did 29 pictures that day, maybe. Yeah, all that kind of.
Did you have the? I remember. I don't remember. I know there was a VHS released in. I think it was like the early '90s, named "One Night with You," which was an. I think it was an official release of the first sit-down show filmed for the '68 comeback special in its entirety.
I think I remember what you're talking about. Yep. And then they did years later, they did a similar release, CD release called Tiger Man, which was an entire one of the sit down concerts. It might have been the same one, I'm not sure. But I think I do remember that. I don't think I owned that one ever, but I do have a memory of that. And I do, yeah. So again, like today, it's easy because you can just look stuff up online and you can find basically all of that stuff. But yeah, I do remember a video that was like one of those entire sort of sit downs. So yeah, it's probably what I saw. Can't remember exactly. It was a long time ago.
yeah, really a long time ago, way before I was even born.
Yeah, many years before you were born. There we go.
Yeah, I was born in '99. This must have been released around '91 or something like that. I mean, like over 30 years ago.
I'd about 7 or 8 years old at the time, so
yeah,
I was an infant baby.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned that if you were asked what's your favorite song from Frankie and Johnny, and you said you wouldn't remember them, I would say Hard Luck.
Okay, Hard Luck. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's a cool
you're
blues
much
tune.
more versed on things like that. Yes, it is a good blues tune. Yes, you're right. Yeah. So I mean, if I went back through them and I looked at them, but there are certain films which are pretty much irredeemable, sadly. I'm not sure Harem Scarum has got a lot going for it, for example. It's possibly Elvis's worst movie. That's another conversation, is what is Elvis's worst film? That was pretty much the low, I think, around that time, wasn't it? So Paradise Hawaiian
Kissing Cousins.
either. Or Kissing Cousin. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, we're not going to pretend that every Elvis movie was wonderful. Obviously, there are some Elvis fans out there who'd be probably horribly offended. But look, it's not Elvis's fault. He did his best. He always did his best. But he didn't have a lot to work with sometimes.
Yeah. Obviously, the scripts were just not there, and the direction and the production sometimes.
Well, they were made in like 2 weeks, some of them. They decided to try and make them very quickly and efficiently. And you also had a situation where the script writers would make more money if they also wrote the songs, even if they weren't songwriters. So they would obviously then pen a song so they could make more money. But
yeah, just a cash grab. Just a cash grab. Basically, to put it straight. Yeah. And by the way, the Tiger Man CD release, I think it was the second sit-down show. The One Night with You was the first one. That was the VHS.
Okay.
The inner like the know-it-all expert in me just woke up.
Yes, can't get one past you.
So then let's move on to the Elvis tribute artist world and your career as an ETA. So how did you first become first of all, how did you first become aware that there is such a business as like Elvis tribute artists? Or were they impersonators back then?
Well, they're still impersonators. And I'm going to say that, I know it's controversial to say that because impersonator has become a dirty word, but impersonators, because we dress up like Elvis. We wear makeup to try and look like him. We try and sound like him. That is impersonation. That's an impression. To me, a tribute, if you called yourself a tribute, would be someone being themselves, just singing someone else's songs, saying, I want to sing the song that Elvis did because I like Elvis. That's a tribute to me. An impersonation is where you buy an expensive jumpsuit and you do your hair, and that's an impersonation. Anyway, that's just arguing about language and semantics. But so I'm the first Elvis impersonator that I saw. I think I was about 12, 13 years old. I went to a holiday park here in the UK, a place called Pontins. Not the classiest place, but a bit of fun, family fun place. And they had an Elvis impersonator, and he was wearing an Aloha jumpsuit. He came out and he did CC Rider, and it was interesting because I thought it was really cool. Oh yeah, Elvis, because I really like Elvis. And he did the first song, and I thought this is cool. But then he just started speaking in his normal accent. He's like, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm an Elvis impersonator," and I found that really annoying because it's like you've hit the stage, you're wearing the jumpsuit, you've got the hair, you've sung the song, and now you're talking as yourself. And I know a lot of ETAs do that, and that's fine. But I just found it disappointing because it kind of killed the immersion for me. They sort of, if I'm going to see someone dressed as Elvis, I want to feel like they're playing the character of Elvis while I'm watching them. Because I want to get into it and pretend that it's Elvis. To me, that's part of the whole point of doing that. Because I come from a family of actors and performers, that's the acting instinct, is to play a character. And to me, that's what it is. That's what impersonation is. What's being, doing this kind of work is you're trying to play the character. You don't believe you are Elvis, obviously, and you would never pretend that you are in that sense. You make jokes about it. I make jokes on stage, like I'll say, "Oh, this is a song I recorded about 65 years ago, I think it was." I'll say something like that, and then it's a joke. It's a play on the fact that we know I'm not Elvis, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm being like him, but we're all having fun pretending that I am. So anyway, that aside, that would be my first experience of an Elvis tribute stroke impersonator. And then later on, when I was about 17, I discovered a couple of local impersonators actually in my hometown. Went to see them and became friends with them, and really enjoyed spending time with them. And one of them in particular, I used to go along with him to shows, and see him work because I loved watching him. He's such a great performer. He's really charismatic. There's a guy called Ivor Potter, who is a guy known as Suspiciously Elvis, and he's still going now, and he's got a wonderful voice, great charisma. And so that was my experience, but I wasn't planning on tribute myself. I was just a huge fan, and I enjoyed watching him. But I started singing Elvis songs at karaoke just for fun. And I'd always do Elvis songs. I'd bring my own backing tracks that I downloaded or even edited myself on my PC at home. I'd bring them on a CD to karaoke, and I would sing unusual Elvis songs, or my favorite ones, that they didn't have on the catalog. I might do like I've Got a Thing About You Baby or something, or Never Been to Spain or whatever. And anyway, I did a bit of that, had fun with it, and then I sort of got a reputation around the pubs as the little Elvis guy who always does Elvis songs. And then one of the pubs I went to regularly, they were having a Christmas party, and they said, "Oh, would you like to do an Elvis set? We're going to have some of the regulars come up. Do you want to do an little Elvis show?" I thought, "Oh yeah, that'd be a bit of fun." So I had a really bad, sort of really wispy kind of teenager-y beard at the time, goatee beard, which I shaved off, and I dyed my hair black. I got myself a jumpsuit made, and I just went for it, just for a bit of fun, really. And it went pretty well actually. Obviously I was 18. It was my very first performance. I didn't have any formal training, but I enjoyed it. Some people liked it, and another pub said, "Oh, do you want to do it at our place?" And I was like, "Okay." And I just started occasionally doing a few Elvis shows, and it just started to build up, and it became a thing that I did. While I was trying to figure out, I was about 18 at the time, I was trying to figure out, well, what's my career going to be? Am I going to go to university? Blah, blah, blah. but I just got busier and busier with Elvis shows. It got to a point where it kind of became my main job. I did other jobs as well, but then eventually it just became my only job, and it still is my only job now. And that's like over 20 years later. So I still haven't figured out what my proper career is going to be. I'm still doing Elvis. But as long as people enjoy what I'm doing, as long as there's an audience for it, and if I can make people happy, then I'm happy. That's my attitude towards it. I take what I do very seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. That's the kind of the approach I take with it. And yeah, it's an incredible privilege to go on stage and sing Elvis's songs, and if people enjoy it, they want to come and see me do it, and I just want to make them happy. That's all I want to do, and I think that's all Elvis ever wanted to do.
Wow, you hit the nail right on the head there. And I mean, like, sometimes I have to say it's truly uncanny when I watch your videos on YouTube. I close my eyes and listen to you sing, or even talk. I'm sometimes I'm just blown away that
Thank you.
That just it's hard to understand sometimes that you can actually do a very convincing Elvis voice. When we realize and when we remember that Elvis's voice is probably one of the hardest voices to imitate in the whole world. Out of all the singers I can think of, I mean, like Freddie Mercury is one who's very difficult. Michael Jackson, quite difficult, probably. Don't know.
I think it's very easy to do a bad impression of Elvis's voice, and you hear a lot of people doing bad impressions. I'm not saying professional tributes, but I mean just people in general. It's an easy voice to do that people know who you're being. If you're going to go, you know, they go, oh, that's Elvis, you know. But to actually do a convincing impression of Elvis is quite complicated because his voice changed. We talked about this before we started recording, but his voice changed a lot through his life, through his career, you know. So the way he sounded in the mid 50s, and then you compare that to the mid 70s. If you didn't know Elvis's career, you just played these clips to someone who didn't know, they could easily think it was two completely different people, because his voice became so much darker and richer as he got older, and it was very, you know, the tonality was different. Lots of things were different. Only really the accent was the same. So it's quite difficult when you say to someone, you know, do your Elvis voice. It's like, well, which voice are we talking about? Are we talking about the voice on Heartbreak Hotel and Big Hunk of Love, you know, 58 with the hard rock sound? Or are we talking about the soulful sound of Suspicious Minds? Or are we talking about the deep bellowing operatic vocal of Hurt from 76? They're just very different things. So to try and replicate that convincingly takes a lot of sort of vocal acrobatics and a lot of thinking as well, and it takes a lot of work. But also it's just the way you're made. It's your anatomy. You know, I'm lucky that I have some kind of natural connection with Elvis's voice that allows me to slip into an Elvis voice fairly convincingly. Not with every style of Elvis, not in every era, but certain eras I can do quite well. But then there can be other people who just don't have that same natural advantage. They could work on it night and day for years, and they might not sound as much like him as I do, just because I'm lucky enough to have a vocal, you know, a box here that's similar in some ways to him, I guess.
Yeah. I'm not going to mention any name of anyone, of any particular Elvis tribute artist, but there are many, and I repeat, there are very many tribute artists, even professional ones, who overdo the voice, particularly the vibrato. I'm not going to say who this is. You probably know. But
I won't get you in trouble, don't worry.
yeah. I won't. But there's one really famous Elvis tribute artist who's, I mean, like, his tone is great, his range, whenever whenever he has a good day, his range is good and all that stuff. But that vibrato is like, let me demonstrate. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. And I go like,
was your chair shaking a little bit there? He's sitting on a vibrating cushion, maybe. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yes. All kidding aside, everyone has their own version of what they do. And honestly, I mean, I have to be fair, I've actually done this at times in my career when I've sort of looked back and I've checked myself back with the originals, because I know these songs really well. I've heard them millions of times, but sometimes you actually have to really actively listen again to a song, and then you can think about it and think, oh, actually, I've not been getting that quite right. I should change that, and I should change it and sing it in a slightly different way. Or I was using a different intonation there or a different timing, because you've done it so many times, you can get stuck in a sort of a autopilot about how you do it, and if you've done it for years and years and years, so it's a good idea as an artist who's a very specific type of artist who's trying to recreate someone else, which is what we do, to go back and really properly listen to a song, like what's on my mind as you were demonstrating there. I think, oh, okay, so I've been doing it like this, but actually, because Elvis is actually slightly different here and here and here. That's always a good idea, I think. So whoever you're talking about there, or anyone else who has a particular style that seems slightly off, could be partly because they actually just haven't done that active listening again to really stop and think about how they're doing it and think, oh, actually, maybe I'm doing this and doing that. The other problem, but the other aspect is that if someone becomes very famous in their own right for being an Elvis tribute, they kind of, it takes on a life of its own, their version of Elvis. So whether it's the vocal style, or whether it's the dancing style, which is, I think, actually a bigger issue with certain Elvis tributes, and again, not going to any names, but sort of trying to present the physical side of Elvis is in the right way. I said the right way, but what I think is the right way is quite tricky, because you've got to be active and you've got to be dynamic, but not too over the top, not too self-congratulatory in the way you do it, not kind of, yeah, I'm showing off, because Elvis didn't perform like he was showing off. He performed like he was just feeling the music and having fun with it. And that's a different style. That's not, look at me, I'm so wonderful. Elvis never had that energy about the way he moved. It was always just like, having fun, and I'm laughing at myself. This is a bit silly. That's the way I see it anyway. And a lot of American in particular, Elvis tributes can be a bit over the top with the dancing, but I think that's just part of the culture of how that world of Elvis tributes have evolved, and what's seen to be good is that how can we outdo each other on the acrobatic side, and that how comes with the vocals as well. I think, things can be overemphasized to try and sort of say, well, I want to have as big an impact with this vocal as possible, so I'm going to do this thing even more. And the danger is you get a little bit away from the original, to the point where a purist like me would watch it and listen to it and think, that's not quite right. That's over the top. That's too far.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed about the vocal delivery of many Elvis tribute artists, lots of ETAs do the opening of Hurt. They do it like, I'm so hurt. They do it like that, and
Very nice. Yes.
Thank you very much. The first time I ever heard that was, I think I heard, again, not gonna mention any names, but a certain very famous British Elvis tribute artist. I think he was the first one who started doing that version, and then all of a sudden I see many, very many Elvis tribute artists who now do Hurt and the opening of the song the same way. And I used to think, what is this? I mean, like, when I listen to the studio version or the Rapid City version from Elvis in concert, the soundtrack, I go like, he didn't sing it that way. I mean, like, what's that? But
Yeah, I think
then
it's sorry, Karen.
yeah, but then I got to hear the FTD live recording of Chicago in October
76. Yeah.
October 14, 76. The one that I think Fort Baxter released in the 90s as a Chicago beat. And there Elvis does this like, I'm so hurt. He did it that way. And that's where this one ETA pick must have
it comes down to when that concert was officially released on an FTD, Follow That Dream label.
2010.
And then people would have heard it and gone, oh, okay. And then I guess he heard that and decided to throw it into his show. And because he's very well known, people will have seen it, heard it, and gone, oh, that's cool. And then I'll copy it. So whether they know it's from that show specifically or not, but I know what you're saying is basically that's the only example I've ever heard of Elvis doing it like that.
Yeah.
Is every other version I've never heard him do that. So I wouldn't consider that to be the normal way to do it, But it's not wrong because Elvis did do it at least once.
Yeah.
But it becomes one of those things that people can adopt a style which then all the other ETAs kind of copy because they think that's going to be more impressive, or that's maybe it becomes the way that it should be done. So you can get this almost arms race of people trying to sort of outdo each other and become bigger and bigger and more bombastic and more impressive as they go. And suddenly, before you know it, it gets slightly detached from what you might consider the normal way that Elvis did something. So it's not wrong, it's just an interpretation. And if the audience enjoy it, the audience enjoy it. That's the most important thing. But from that nerdy kind of purist perspective, I gravitate more towards ETAs who I consider to be very authentic in the way they perform and the way they sing certain songs, or the way they move to them. Because at the end of the day, when I watch an ETA, I want to be able to pretend it's Elvis on stage. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're all there for, because we all love Elvis.
That's true.
And you can become a fan specifically of an ETA, and of course there are lots of rabid fans of certain ETAs. You love a certain ETA, they go and see them all the time. They love them. Sometimes they're a bit weird because sometimes they just love that one ETA and they hate all the others, which is a bit odd, I think. But yeah, it's you can go down that road of becoming quite sort of, it's sort of like an exaggeration of the original style, which to me I find slightly breaking of that immersion. That, like I said, the whole idea that to me that there's someone who's on stage and you just feel like they feel like Elvis, they seem like him, and you can just enjoy it because you can basically just sit back and relax and enjoy the show and kind of pretend he's there, because that's what we all do, right? If we had a time machine, the first thing I'd do is I'd go back and watch an Elvis concert live and actually see him for real. That's what I'd do.
Yeah.
So that's the closest we can get.
It's a theatrical portrayal.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, I mean, like, impersonation is it's a good term, it's a solid term, and it fits the criteria of what you guys are doing pretty well. But at the same time, it's not solely just an imitation, because I would say it's closer to how an actor portrays a character. It's more of a acting than imitating for me.
Yeah, it absolutely is acting. The specific word we choose to, maybe impersonation isn't the perfect word, and imitation isn't the perfect word either. But I feel like tribute is even further away than correct, because a tribute, yeah, I can see what people mean by saying, okay, I'm paying my personal tribute to Elvis. But a tribute doesn't feel like it's directly connected to copying him. And that's what we are doing. We're trying to copy what he did as well, to the point where people feel like it's just like Elvis. So whatever word you pick, I I think, you know, what we'll appreciate is a highly polished and professional performer. And it's not just about, I was thinking about this before, it's, you know, there are two sides to it. There's how well you can be like Elvis, but also how good an entertainer you are in general. And they're not the same thing, because you could be a really great imitator, impersonator, tribute artist of Elvis, but not have the best charisma or the greatest sort of stage presence. Or the other way around, you could have great stage presence, great charisma, great sense of humor, everyone loves you, but you don't sound that much like Elvis, so you don't look much like him. So, you know, what you need ideally for the greatest performers in that industry are going to be people who've got both of those aspects. You know, and someone like a Dean Z is probably the most successful ETA in the world right now, because he has those two in abundance. You know, whether you like his specifics or not, you know, he has a specific style which maybe is a bit of an exaggeration in certain ways, but he has the capacity to do a very good impression of Elvis. He looks amazing on stage. He's got a great body shape, great face. Obviously, he's an amazing dancer, but also he's very charismatic and he's got great presence. So, you know,
and a great voice.
That's the formula. Yeah, exactly. So he has all the attributes, you know, at his disposal, and to such a point that you get an ETA like that, and they can kind of, whether they should or shouldn't, story, but they transcend the original. They transcend Elvis and so it's about going to see Dean Z more so than Elvis maybe in some ways. I mean, he's obviously doing an Elvis show, but you can become a huge fan of him and his version. That's what some of the biggest ETAs who actually have a commercial appeal beyond just being an Elvis tribute. They kind of become a name in their own right, and that's the greatest level you could ever achieve as an Elvis tribute, is that you really just sort of get a following in your own right, because people like you as an entertainer just as much as they liked you doing your version of Elvis.
Yeah, and Bill Cherry, probably the best 70s Elvis ever.
Yeah, he's my favorite. You know, I'll just say, you know, I don't think it's controversial to pick Bill. I like Bill's authenticity. That's what I like most about Bill, is that it's mostly his body language, really. He's got a great look, of course. He looks a lot like Elvis on stage, good proportions, face shape, etc. But he just has the way he carries himself, just the way he walks on stage. It's like that's the way Elvis walked. You know, the little nods, little looks, and the little sort of laughs and jokes and things. It feels right. And his attitude as well is I like it because he's not too over the top. He's not too show-offy. It feels very much that he's got that sort of cheeky fun sense of fun that Elvis had, which is for me one of the fundamentals of the Elvis character. So yeah, Bill's my unashamedly Bill's my favorite 70s Elvis.
Yeah, and the talking voice is scary. I mean, like, he talks just like Elvis. He sings very much like 70s Elvis. It's just uncanny. I have no idea how he does that, but it's kind of like he transforms into being Elvis when he's on stage. And it's quite scary to witness. And I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, but I'm pretty sure it's even scarier to see live and experience him live, because
yeah, it's great to see him live, and he's a really nice guy too. And as is Dean, they're both really nice individuals. They're very generous with their time. They're very, you know, just chatting to them when I got to speak to them earlier this year, hanging out backstage with them. It was a privilege, but also it was just good fun. They were just very, very nice, very friendly, very polite, just asking lots of questions, having fun. You know, there was no ego there at all. And to me, that's the most important thing, is that we represent Elvis with great respect with what we do, but also we don't allow it to go to our heads. We don't think of ourselves as anything above our station. You know, we have what we have because of Elvis, so we should eternally be grateful for that.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, the up and coming superstar in the business. I mean, like just listen to Jimmy Holmes. It's
yeah, he's like the perfect 1972 Elvis, really. That's kind of, it's very specific, but it's like, well, not just 72, but you really, when he's dressed as Elvis on tour, Elvis from 1972, his hair, the way he has it done, his body shape, everything. He's just, yeah, he's the closest you can get right now to that.
It's unbelievable. And I mean, like, I like the fact that he does other eras of the 70s too. He does That's the Way It Is, or Aloha, he does that as well. And then when even though he might be wearing a jumpsuit from 72 or something, he still does songs like Hurt or Unchained Melody. He plays the piano. He even plays the piano just like Elvis did. Even his playing style of the piano is spot on.
Yeah.
And
there's an incredible standard of Elvis tribute in the world. There really is. And, you know, it sounds a shame to say, but, you know, at times when people, if they meet me and they ask me what I do, sometimes I hesitate about telling them I'm an Elvis tribute, because it's not that I'm ashamed about what I do. It's because what people think of when they think of an Elvis tribute, they think of a certain style, let's put it that way, of a person, you know, an enthusiastic amateur having a bit of fun singing some Elvis songs. And it's, you know, that's fine. People can do whatever they want and they can enjoy it. And as long as they respect Elvis, because 99% of people do that are huge Elvis fans themselves. So they have no less right to do it than I do. So I'm perfectly comfortable with it. But it's not the same as, you know, you talk about a Bill Cherry, a Dean Z, a Jimmy Holmes, all of those guys. We're talking about a different category. We're talking about actual fully professional acts of people who dedicate their lives to honing their craft and you know, being almost like the top athletes. You know, they're like the Premier League players of Elvis tributes. So it's a totally different thing, and it's very heartening to see that there are so many people who, of all ages, who are dedicated to this craft of, you know, keeping Elvis's memory alive and you know, giving us all the pleasure of being able to watch them perform and get, you know, get that excitement and that tingle of thinking, wow, this is, you know, in that song, in that moment, what they did there, I just feel like I'm watching Elvis. And that's all any of us are trying to do.
yeah, exactly. It's completely different. It's like comparing apples to oranges. It's a total different in a whole different ballpark, as I would say. But before we close this episode of the Show Business podcast, first of all, thank you, JD, for being my guest on this show. It was a great experience to have you on, and it was a huge privilege for me as well. But last but not least, I would like to ask you, what's your absolute favorite Elvis song? Whether it is your favorite to perform or your favorite one to listen to. Did I understand you right that your favorite one to perform, if you were allowed to pick just one song, it would be Suspicious Minds?
Well, first of all, the beginning part of what you said, thank you very much for having me on to the podcast. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you, Ville. Is that how I say it? Ville?
Yeah,
Ville.
Ville.
Sorry, try and get that right. My Finnish is not very good, but you'll have to forgive me. Your English is excellent. But yes, it's been a wonderful pleasure to talk to you. And no, I mean, if I was just performing one song for a client, it would be Suspicious Minds because of how famous that is. But my personal favorite Elvis song is Pog Salad Annie. That is my favorite song. I wouldn't say it's my favorite to perform because it's not like I love the physicality, because it takes a lot of energy performing that song, you know what I mean? But I love the song itself. I don't know why. It's a very unique song. I mean, it's described as swamp rock is the way it's described. But you know, what a unique and tiny genre that must be, swamp rock. But it's just so quirky. And Elvis himself clearly loved it, because as soon as he started performing it, he always performed it. I mean, in 1973, I think he only did it twice, but beyond that, you know, he even mentions the song in 1969, and then he starts performing it in early 1970. And then, like I said, apart from 73, he performs it throughout, and he evolves it as well. So you listen to those early versions with all the talking parts at the beginning, they're much slower, they're much truer to the original, the Tony J. White original. But then by the time we get to 75, 76, it's taken on a whole other mode. It's totally different in the way it's portrayed, and the horns and the solos. It's just, if someone's listening to this and they've never heard this song, just look up Elvis Polk Salad Annie, and if you have the time, just have a flick through YouTube and click on a few different versions of it, because it gets quite different. So yeah, that is my absolute favorite song. It's not just my favorite Elvis song, it is my favorite song of all time. And it's really quirky, and just, it's different than anything else you'll ever hear, basically. So that's the only way I can describe it.
And it's a whole lot of fun.
It is. It's great fun. And Elvis clearly loved, he just, I would say that was one of his favorite songs as well. And the reason why I say it is because he was always putting it in, even in 77 when he was sick and he was tired. He still would put it in, fairly regularly, when he probably didn't feel like he could do much with it, but he just liked it. He just really liked it.
And there's this one version from, I think it was Johnson City in February 77. There's an audience 8mm video of that performance, and obviously he was in quite a bad shape, especially during the first part of the February 77 tour. He was very, very ill and very bloated with water retention from the drugs and everything. But if you have time, I think you must have seen it, being the same level of a diehard as I am. But
are you talking about the bit at the end when he does this whole karate sort of step and move across the stage?
Yeah, and tries to do the arm gyration thing as well that he used to do in like 70.
Yeah. He had his
72.
later version of it. It was sort of more of a pump later on rather than a twist, and that's probably because he had problems with his shoulder, I imagine, things like that. Again, reading his the Dr. Nicolopoulos, his doctor's book, you hear about all the various ailments, maladies and things he had, and things were wrong with him, and that was always a song that he really felt physically afterwards. He'd feel it hurt him performing that song, but he still did it, and this is why I'd maintain it's obviously one of his absolute favorites, because even when he was sick, he would still try and do it, and he'd still go for it.
Yeah, my favorite one must be Suspicious Minds. We both clearly are into these physical songs that Elvis used to perform very physically and with lots of physical activity and lots of moving.
Sure. I mean, I can't argue with Suspicious Minds. I mean, it's also one of my favorites, but again, it's one of those songs where he evolved it, and I love some of my favorite stuff that Elvis ever did on stage was where he's really expressing himself, not just vocally but physically at the same time. That's what he was so incredible he was such an incredible natural mover. He was able to tell the story of what he was doing, not just vocally but physically the whole time as well.
Yeah, and that's I think that's one of the main reasons I would say that Elvis is what made Elvis so special in all ways, and with all the special characteristics combined. He had an amazing voice. He had an amazing charisma. He had an amazing way of moving. He had such a natural aura about himself as a performer. He was very genuine. He had clearly an enormous respect for his fans, his audience. He always, whenever he felt right, he put on like clearly the maximum effort that he ever had. And his dedication to his job was, whenever he was in the right mind, right set of mind, and the right health, he was unique. There will never be another.
He's a very special human being, and it speaks to how special he was that we're here having this type of conversation all these years later. People like you and me who ordinarily probably would never have met. We're friends because of our mutual love for Elvis. So that speaks volumes to how special he really was.
Exactly, and there will never be another Elvis Presley. It's just
absolutely not.
Yeah, it's a fact, and it's not even sad, because I mean, like, how could anyone even imagine another Elvis Presley? I mean, like, it's completely natural. There was one of him, and then there will be other people, other types of entertainers.
Because he was so special, we want to do everything we can to get close to that. So
Yeah.
he's no longer around, and he's been dead the whole time we've been alive.
Yeah.
But you know, part of the reason why I ended up doing what I do is because I love Elvis and I want to somehow feel closer to him. That's why people might enjoy going to see Elvis tributes. Not everyone does, of course, but because they want to feel closer to him. That's why we listen to his albums, and we want to see those rare bits of footage that we've never seen before. We get excited about that because we just feel closer to him, and that's incredible. We never saw him live, you know, and people who knew him. We talk about an aura. They say that in real life, you know, he had an incredible aura. He had an incredible presence as a human being. He just had some special spirit about him, which, you know, will never be replicated. He was just an incredibly unique and awesome human being.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be replicated. I mean, like,
No.
even you tribute artists, you guys can get close. You can do things similarly, but you don't have to be exact copies of that, because everyone
can't ever be. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
And
can't ever get close to that. But what we can do is just try and grab a tiny bit of magic here and there. If we can just have a spark of a moment which makes people think of Elvis and brings them into that place and go, oh, that was like Elvis, then that's all we can do.
Yeah, close. Getting close might not be the right word, but you guys can capture, just like you said, if you just manage to capture some of that magic that Elvis had, either as a performer or as a person, or both, like the best of you guys do, like you, Bill, Jimmy, everyone. You guys have the right character, and you are the right type of persons to be able to portray that whole package. It's just, it feels like such a relief for us who never had the opportunity to see Elvis live, that there are people like you who are making it possible after all these years to still get in touch with it, just a little bit of that magic that the guy had.
Thank you. And that's all that any of us, I think, want to hear. If we can make the people watching us happy, then we're happy. I mean, that's certainly the way I see it.
Right. As I already said, thank you very much, JD, for your for joining in, and thanks for this wonderful conversation. We had a great fun with this one, and ladies and gentlemen, this was the second episode of the ShowBizNess podcast. We'll see you around maybe next week, maybe the week after that, or something like that. But till we meet you again, adios. Thank you very much, JD. And
thank you very much.
Exactly.
You had to throw it in there, didn't we? Thank you.
Thank you.